Hey guys, welcome back to the Fantasy Funhouse. I don't want to dwell too much on the CS Asia Championships because it did not go well for me. I had 3 players in the grand final, still ended top 97%, which I think sums up my fantasy for this season. And that was with the bracket actually playing out as I predicted. The only thing was, obviously, Mouse didn't win, which didn't help my predictions here. And I also went in double on Lin Vision, right? That was a risky play from me. I have to do the risks. They went to the quarterfinals, so that did go as I expected, but unfortunately, the individuals just didn't really perform. I was kind of hoping that, particularly against like Tai Lu, for instance, that they'd have some good games. A couple of high-rated games would be enough to justify going in on these players, but fortunately, didn't pan out. Absolutely tanked it. One of the worst results of the season is what it is. Puts me at number 14. I've dropped out of the top 10. But it's only 12 points between me and number 6. So I do think that I can make my way back there. I don't know if I can get to the top 5. That would only happen, I think, if I got like 1%er or a couple of 5% drops in these final events. But with a few still to play, there's definitely room for me to go higher. And I will say, this event has proved a theory that I've been developing, and that's that the fantasy meta has changed. CS2 has broken HLTV fantasy. Let's take a look at some proof. The best value for money players in CAC 2023, there was only one FaZe player. This is the team that won the grand final. There were 3 Astralis players in here who didn't make the grand final. Rez is here. He was eliminated in the quarterfinals. We take a look at Thunderpick, and it's a similar situation. We do have more FaZe players in the top 3. They did win the event, but Zontix, all right, 4th best player you could have picked, eliminated in quarters. Cloud9 and Monty, both eliminated in the semis. We take a look at my team for this. I had Mantu, one of my best performing players, eliminated in quarters. Still did really well for me. Bro also eliminated. I only had 2 players in the grand final, and I had a top 9% finish. In the CCT Partner League, I went in on Preezy, did pretty well. But have you ever seen 256 points on a single player before? Even Roy, 183. These numbers are insane. So what is happening? In CS2, we moved to MR12, which means that games are now about 80% of their previous length. Fantasy points are mostly based off of the individual performance of a player, which is measured by their HLTV rating. Let's take a look at Donk. Since CS2, he has averaged a 1.46 rating, which is insanely high. In the 3 months prior to CS2, he was on a 1.29 rating. This is still very high, but it's kind of in the expected range of what you'd think a star player would be. Nico actually highlighted an example of this. He said, some of the stats with MR12 format make me sick. Now, Donk's obviously got a good rating here, but I think the players he was highlighting are Zontix and Magix. Zontix, 12 for 12, Magix, 12 for 6, 1.61 and 1.52 rating on each of these players. Good performances, don't get me wrong, but are they 1.61 and 1.52 rating performances? So what does this mean for fantasy? Well, players that have had good games will give you more points than they previously did. So what I believe this does is introduce a higher level of variance and randomness to fantasy. So looking at FaZe, for instance, there are 4 players that can top frag a series. Rain and Brokey did it lots in Sydney, Rops in the last couple of events, and Twist as well. Previously, you'd still be rewarded for picking players from the teams that make the grand final, even if your player wasn't the top fragger, because the variance in points wasn't so significant. So the core advice has always been to play the format and get 4 players into the grand final. This rule no longer applies because Rops might make 80 more points than Twist, or Rain might make 50 more points than Brokey. And this is a harder thing to predict. The top teams at CAC had 2 Astralis players, with 3 of the top 10 having 2 Astralis and 1 ENCE player, so no Mouse players at all. So now you have to pick the right players, which sounds like a good thing for fantasy, but it's the randomness that's the issue, because even the best players aren't consistent. So where does this take the meta? Well, there are 2 key changes to how we draft because of this. Number 1, we look at consistency of players when it comes to the more expensive players. If you're spending at like 200k plus, it should be on a player with a high percentage of 1.0 games, which you can see on HLTV if you look at stats. So this means that picking entry fraggers and space-taking IGLs is much more punishing than previously because of the higher risk of negative KD and rating. So it's better to pick anchors, lurkers, more passive players. Rops, Jimfat, Blaymeth, these have been some of the best fantasy players to pick in CS2. Number 2, on the other side of the coin, budget picks should be inconsistent players. So players like Vorup, Config, Bro, players that have this high variance in their negative and positive ratings, where they can have those pop-off 1.2, 1.3 rating games. All they need is 1 or 2 of those games an event, like Borup did at CAC, and they'll lift your drafts significantly. Now I expect HLTV will adjust the rating when they have more data, but I suspect it's probably not quite as simple as just reducing it by like 20%. So for these final events of the season, I'll try and apply this logic that I've shared and see how well it works in practice. And we'll start with the Blast Premier Full Final. It's a pretty standard Blast event with 2 groups of 4. The top 3 go through to playoffs, with the top of each group going straight to the semis and getting a round of padding. Every team except Complexity has or will be making roster changes. So that's something to think about. These are going to be my group predictions. I think in Group A, FaZe and Na'Vi will be fighting for the top spot, with FaZe probably winning. Cloud9 are actually the favorite to win versus Na'Vi, but I don't know, I think Na'Vi weren't that bad at Sydney. They lost to FaZe and Mouse 1-2, which were the teams that were in the grand final. And that was playing with Blade, okay? Now got Wonderful, a massive upgrade over Blade for sure. So I kind of feel good about them. I do say Cloud9 beat Nip though. I think that's pretty comfortable to say. In Group B, Vitality easily beat Heroic. Mercy's a great addition to that team. Complexity should beat Astralis, but I think that's a very close opener. And Astralis, I think they're the Danish team that prevails in the lower bracket. Sorry, Heroic, there's just too much weirdness going on in that team to feel comfortable with picking them at all. So that's how I think the groups go. In terms of the playoffs, I think this obviously depends on the groups, but if it goes the way I said, then this is probably the playoff bracket, with FaZe and Vitality as favorites to be in the grand final. However, I think FaZe trip up here. Na'Vi may beat them in groups or Cloud9 in semis. I think they lose one of those matches. So we either get Na'Vi or Cloud9 versus Vitality in the grand final, in my opinion. But with Vitality having a good path to top their group, I think this is their event. That's going to be my baseline logic for the draft. First of all, here are some players I want to highlight. Robs is ridiculously expensive at 229. I think that Twists and Rain are really good value. I'd personally lean toward Twist due to his recent performance and less deaths per round, so less risk there. Vitality, I think Mezzi, very good at 205k, but he was the star player on Fnatic. He is definitely not the star player on Vitality, and so there's always that risk of a new team as well with these new roles. I'd maybe be a little cautious there. Floppy is easily the best choice on Complexity at 208k. You can do a nice pairing with him and JT for a clean 400. I think Wonderful is very risky at 210k, but he's cheap. Alexi continues to be a very affordable option with an average 1.0 rating. He's a high variance player, so I think he's a good choice. And I think JL at 196 is also very cheap for this player. He is really good. Embrace CS2, definitely one to be keeping an eye on. Astralis, Blaymeth is ridiculously expensive, 233k. He's 1k more expensive than Zywu. I wouldn't go there. However, what you could do is potentially Stare and Device. That's a great combo. Stare at 188, I think, is a really good value player. I think for Cloud9 as well, really cheap players. Hobbit, insane value at 188k. I think he's pretty much a must pick for this event. I'd also say Axile has been bouncing back. He's sub 200 now, which is crazy for Axile, right? Now that Cloud9's finding their form, this could be a good time to buy in on Axile. But if you don't want to go that risky path, I think Perfecto is a good choice as well. Only players from these two teams I would pick are Config and Shush. I wouldn't touch anyone else in these two teams. Config's been playing insanely good lately. I think if you have to pick a cheap player, he's the guy to go. And Shush, I don't know, this guy used to be 210k. It's crazy how cheap he is these days. Definitely a player to consider, but I don't really believe either of these teams makes out of groups, but those are the two I'd be going in on. For my draft though, as I said, I think Vitality are winning this event, so that's gonna be a team I'm putting the most emphasis on. And there are two combos you can go. You can go Flames Mezzi. I think it's a pretty good combo, but I'm not really sure how Mezzi's gonna be formed. Flamesy didn't have a great start to CS2. This is kind of your middle of the pack combo. You could technically go Sphinx with one of those, but it would cost you a lot. Or you can go ZywOo Apex. Now this combo sounds crazy and it's very high risk with Apex, but it's the same price as the Mezzy Flames combo. And I think ZywOo, this guy is guaranteed high rating, right? He has had one negative rating game the entire season of CS. That's going back to CSGO as well. That's since the player break. So, you know, with where I'm at in the season, I need to take some riskier drafts. And I feel like ZywOo, not that much more expensive than ROPS, which a lot of people are drafting. I'm going to be putting my eggs in the Vitality basket. I'm going to be putting them into ZywOo's basket. So that's the combo I'm going from Vitality. As I mentioned, also, the best budget pick you can make this event is going to be Hobbit. I feel like I have to pick him because of that. I think Config is also a good choice if you want to save some money, but I think Cloud9 go further than NIP. As I said, I think Cloud9 could be in the grand final. So I want to have Hobbit if they make it there. I think they make it to the semis regardless, so I feel like he's a good choice. Na'Vi will then be my other team that I pick into from Group A. So 2 from Group A, 2 from Group B. I'm going to be going in on Lexi, 187. I kind of have to be able to afford a combo from Na'Vi. And like I said, he's a high variance player. He's got potential for those 1.3 rating maps. And he doesn't kind of throw his life away like a Karrigan or Apex does. So I feel like he's a pretty good choice. And then here I've got a choice of going either Wonderful or Bit. I just think Wonderful's a little bit too risky at the moment. I think Bit is the best player on this team. And I'm banking on that deep Na'Vi run. And Bit is one of those guys that can have those 2.0 rating carry games. So that's kind of what I'm banking on here. This is going to be the Knife Throwers. This is, it's a little bit of a risky draft. As I said, I have to make those risks, but I also kind of want to test the theories, right, on this new fantasy meta. I want to test it by picking some players that can have crazy rating games. ZywOo and Bit. We're looking for huge pushing the ceiling up. Want to see how it works. See if I can put this theory to the test. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you're running. And of course, best of luck.